crack, and I'm going to start off by embarrassing the hell out of you. But
You always forget I had two older brothers. So you always forget that.
what I want to say, Nick, it's extremely kind of you to do this. I know your time's short, and you got a lot of people who want to speak to you, but thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't, and I mean this, and I'm gonna embarrass the hell out of you. But I think I'm talking to Rhodesia's most famous, most successful, and probably the country's most popular sportsman. And so to have your story on the record is
Well,
a real treat for us. And so
that's
thank you very much.
very
Thank you very
kind
much
words.
indeed.
Thanks, Hannah. Thank you so much, man.
Nick, um, let's just, I know it's the question you've been asked a million times, but tell us about a little bit about your family and the first time you picked up a golf club.
Well, my family moved up to Rhodesia in '61 from South Africa. My family had lived there since the war ended. My eldest brother was born in Karachi when it was still India. And then Tim and I, my other brother, he and I were born in Durban. And then my family decided to move to Rhodesia in '61. So when I got up there, I was 4 years old. I hadn't even started school yet. So, a lot of people say, oh, Nick Price is not a Rhodesian or a Zimbabwean, but I didn't know anything else growing up. That was my country. I mean, I had no idea, recollection of what happened in South Africa. But anyway, how I got started was I having two older brothers. Kit, my eldest, he was 11 years old, and my other brother, Tim, was 7 years old. And of course, I always wanted to hang with my brothers because they did such much nicer things than I did. They always off on adventures and whatever. And I guess I was about 8, and Tim and two of his buddies had gone to a second-hand shop, Stevenson's second-hand shop on what was then Jamison Avenue, and bought this really raggedy old set of clubs with it was a real mishmash of hickory shafts, plastic coated steel shafts. I mean, there were 3 drivers, 4 brassies, and I mean, there was like probably 40 clubs in this bag, and it was in an old canvas bag that was moth-eaten, and the actual strap was a piece of rope. And so anyway, when they got back from there, and Tim said to me, "Oh, do you want to come to the golf course with us?" And of course, they never asked me to do anything with them, so I just jumped at the opportunity. So we snuck onto this golf course called Sherwood, which was only about
Yes.
2 miles from where we lived.
Yes.
And we snuck onto, I can't remember the holes. They were probably like number 13 and 14 or 14 and 15. They were down in the Flay, close to where we lived. And little did I realize that, I was going to be the caddy. So I put this bag, with this rope strap on my back. And of course, these guys were hitting it all over the place and left, right, and they were shouting orders at me. And I was running over, bringing them clubs. I had no idea what clubs I was bringing them. But eventually, after about half an hour, there was one left-handed club in the bag, and I'd found this golf ball. And in those days, I played left-handed, and I batted left-handed in cricket and whatever. And so I picked up this 5-iron and just started belting the ball down because the other guys were in the bush, back in the long grass. And that's basically how I got started. Went there a couple of times with them, and I think we got caught. One of the members caught us and said, "Oh, you don't need to be sneaking on the golf course. They have these little junior tournaments every weekday weekday morning during the school holidays. You can go up there, and it's like in those days, we were like 10 cents for 18 holes. So that's how we really got started."
And Nick, talk about junior golf and the help that you got getting going. There was a fantastic support system in Rhodesia, which helped the youngsters.
Yeah, it was amazing. Most of it was done by junior golfers, moms and dads who were involved in it, particularly the mums, who would run these events. And we played 5 Monday through Friday at different golf courses, which was wonderful. I mean, I think we had Royal Salisbury or Royal Harare on Monday morning, and Chapman was Tuesday, then Country Club was Wednesday, and then where was the other one? I think it might have been Wingate on Thursday, and then we had Warren Hills on Friday, which was the course that was closest to me. But it costs virtually nothing. I mean, I say nothing, 10 cents, and that was it. To play 18 holes, and we carried our own bags or pulled our own trolleys. And that's how I got started. And I remember the first one at Warren Hills, which was on a Friday. I actually locked myself in the toilet. I was too scared to come out. I'd never played with anyone in my life before, just my brother and his mates. And it took a lot of coaxing to get me out of there. But, when I look back on that, it was so funny. I think you always have, as a youngster, you always have sort of like a fear of meeting strangers, especially when you're sort of 8 or 9, especially when these kids were all in their mid-teens and older. So, because in those days, golf really, when I started playing golf, the guys at school said to me, "How can you play golf? That's my old man plays golf. Nobody plays golf." But there were a group of us, certainly, in the late 60s that got together, and we really got to enjoy our junior golf during the school holidays. And I think that's around about the time you and I met. It must have been about 71, maybe 1970, when I came and stayed with you in Morambi Drive there, and we played at Hillside. I mean, that's a long time ago, Hannes.
Yeah, I know, Nick. We've been friends. I know we've been friends for 50 years, but
yeah,
it's been a long time. Nick, just a bit about the caddies and how they helped us in the early days. They were really a big part of our lives. The African caddies.
They really were. Yeah, they really were. And, they were a law unto themselves. I mean, they were a real unique bunch of characters, And most of the Shona that I learned in my early days was from the caddies, which was normally a lot of bad language. But, we did learn to communicate. But they were a great bunch. I didn't really get a caddy, until I was probably like 15 or 16. Most of the time it was, either carrying your own bag or using caddy carts, as we called them in those days. And then occasionally during tournaments we'd have caddies, but most of us couldn't afford it, to be honest. It was a luxury. But I had my good old friend Thomas Mukunda, who caddied for me. He was the next door neighbors, the Cooks,
yes.
son, and I went up to the golf course, and he was there. He said, "I want to caddy for you." I said, "I got no money. What am I going to pay you with?" So anyway, we came to an agreement. I think I gave him a couple of shirts or something, and that was about all I had to give, But it was great fun, I mean, it was such a lighthearted, just so much fun. And I think the one thing that, we loved about junior golf more than anything else, obviously, was the camaraderie and playing in the team events. But we didn't have, like in school sport, we didn't have a teacher, overseeing what we were doing. So sometimes we misbehaved, but generally speaking, we were really, we respected the etiquette, and the rules of the golf course. Otherwise, we wouldn't be invited back. The juniors in those days, as you remember, we were under such scrutiny from the older members, and especially some of the really crusty ones, who were watching every move we would make. And any time a bunker wasn't raked or there wasn't a ball mark repaired, we got blamed. So what we learned as kids, what we learned was that we'd go around and certainly if we saw an unraked bunker, we'd go in there and rake it because we knew we'd get blamed for it, or you'd repair a ball mark. So, it was a great grounding in many ways because we were so aware of the condition of the golf course.
Nick, you were part of a pretty famous bunch of golfers that came through. Dennis Watson, Mark McNulty, Tony Johnson. Mark and you ended up at school together, but just tell us a bit about your first outing to go and visit Mark on the farm.
You remember that story, huh? Well, he was out at Centenary, and I was out, I think I was like 15, and he was a little older than I think Mark's 3 or 4 years older than I am. Anyway, he'd invited me to go out for the fact, I think I was even younger. I was probably about 13, because he was still at PE then. So he was a senior, and I'd gone out there. And anyway, they had sand greens at Centenary, and I never putted on sand greens in my life before, And so we'd organized this game with Mark's dad, Vernon, and another gentleman. And I had no idea how to rake these greens. And these guys weren't going to help me at all. But one thing you do when you have sand greens is you go with the rake, and if you've got, a 20-foot putt, you rake pretty hard. And then as you get to a hole about 3 foot from the hole, you start lifting up on the rake. So the sand gets thicker and the hole gets bigger. Well, they didn't tell me this. I was raking all the way through like 6 or 8 feet, and I kept hitting the ball. And anyway, they caught me badly, and we had some. They were gambling. We were gambling, should I say? And they caught me pretty bad that first round. But then I cottoned on and figured out what they were doing. But it was great. I mean, it was tough. There was a lot of action, with the war going on up there, and there were times when we were really scared about the military presence and everything. So, but I had a really nice time out there. I got to meet a lot of farmers, and play golf with some of the guys who were boarders at my school, who were from that area. Got to spend some time with them. So it was a fun trip out there.
A bit of a awakening for you, Nick, coming from Salisbury, going out there and realizing that there was actually a war on. I mean, a lot of people in Salisbury, no fault of theirs, but they were pretty inured to what was going on out there. So it must have been.
Yeah, it was. There was, the airfield was right near the golf course there. So, there was a lot of action going on and that. And, you're right. When you're 13 years old, you sort of 14 years old, you'd really, you understand what's going on, but you don't actually see it. And that was probably the first sort of wake-up call that we had. I had anyway. And then staying at the house, they had grenade screens and all the sandbags up and that sort of thing. So I was more scared of the scorpions coming out the sandbags than I was of getting attacked. I didn't know what, to be attacked was. So it was kind of, I didn't really know what was going on.
Nick, you're at Prince Edward. All the emphasis is on rugby and cricket, really. Those are the main sports.
Yeah.
But you starting to really make a name for yourself, and you're coming through as a golfer. How old were you when you won the World Junior Championship?
I was 17. It was middle of 1974. But I loved, having 2 older brothers. I loved every sport. I mean, my eldest brother Kit was probably the most talented sportsman out of all of us, and he had an incredible aptitude for sports, being able to not only having a natural talent, but he had this brain for being able to analyze things, and was very, very much a methodical sort of by the book batsman at cricket. Very, very good cricketer. Got his colors at PE, and he played Nuffield. But and then Tim was like the opposite. Tim was this. He could pick up anything and play anything, play any kind of sport, whether it was cricket, golf. He was a great athlete. He was a good diver. I mean, he did so many sports, which of course I tried to do along with him. And he really was a jack of all trades. I mean, I don't want to say he was a master of none, because he got pretty good at golf during his life, and actually played in the Dunhill Championships a couple of times and played, I don't know how many pro events. But the one thing was funny with Tim, he was always trying to reinvent the wheel. He was one of those guys that, well, you'd read something in a book or you'd watch an instructional video or whatever it was at the time. And he had his own way. He said, I'm going to do it my way. Instead of sort of conforming to the basic fundamentals, as of golf, he had some really strange, outlook on some of the things that he was working on. But, he was a great brother, and we played a lot of golf together. I got sort of to a stage where, I started learning a little more about the game, and I was a little more of an individual, and kind of left what he was trying to help me with and teach probably when I was about 14, 15, and I went my own way. Some of it was good, some of it was not so good, but And then, I played all the sports at school. I loved everything. We played cricket, played rugby. Couldn't run very fast, so I had pretty good hands, so I was always flank. And loose scrums were not my forte, but anyway. I played, as I say, played everything at school. Honestly, I didn't play much tennis. That was the only game I didn't play. I played a little bit of squash, but everything else we did. We swam and we did diving and we did athletics, and it was compulsory. We had to. And I think that gave us a great grounding for all the sports that, or certainly for me in golf. It was great for me. I had this opportunity to go to. In fact, Fred Beaver came back, my good friend from Bulawayo. He came back from the Junior World in 1973, and he said, "Nick, you've got to go to this thing." I said, "Well, there's no way. How am I going to get, I don't know what the air ticket was in those days, but I said, there's no way we can afford to send, my mom can afford to send me over there." And he said, no, they give you money towards your air ticket. And all you got to do is write in, and, if you apply and you get in, they'll give you this money. And it was like $500 for 2 guys to go. And anyway, I wrote off, and I asked some of the other guys if they wanted to come with me, and we could slip out, because my mom said, "You've got to do all the admin. I'm not writing any letters. I'm not doing it. You've got to write all the letters and do the correspondence." So I did, and then they said they were going to give us $250 to each guy to come, which in those days, I think the air ticket, if I remember correctly, from Salisbury to San Diego in California was $218 return, which, today, I don't know what that would be today, but it would be obviously a hell of a lot more than that. But anyway, I went over there just, I had no idea, honestly, how good I was. I was pretty good at home, but I was beating 15 guys at home, And I remember being picked up at the airport by the clerks who I was being billeted out with. And we went straight home, changed into, so I had a shower, changed into golf clothes, and we went over to play golf with Doug Clark. And Doug Clark was 15 years old. He was 2 years younger than me. Well, I'm telling you, when I saw this guy play, I thought I had got no chance here. This guy hit the ball 10 yards further than I did. He was really a polished player. I felt like a complete yobbo next to him, and my clubs weren't great. These guys all had brand new clubs, and I'd brought over, some golf balls I had at home. And anyway, it was kind of strange. And then we went over to Torrey Pines the next day, and it was a wonderful golf course for me. And one thing led to another. I ended up winning it. And that was I don't want to say the furthest thing from my mind, because you dream about this stuff, And when it happened, my mom was so great, because she said, "Well, maybe you can play a little bit, and whatever." Anyway, so because she had said, "Oh, you finish your education, you got to go to university, and you got to go to that." And all I could think about was playing golf. So, but she was pretty much behind me. But then so.
Just a little bit about your wonderful mom. I have such wonderfully warm memories. What a wonderful lady. She was a big part of your life. Sadly, you lost your dad early.
Yeah.
But your mom was always there.
Yeah, I lost my mom and lost my dad in 1967. My mom was 45. I was 10 at the time. It was a really big, left a huge scar in our lives and a big hole for us. But fortunately, Kit, my eldest brother, he was 21. He was doing his articles at university, and he left and took over our little family business that we had at the time, which wasn't really very much. It was enough to pay bills and that. And he built it up into a really nice business, in the end, back in the late 70s. But, my mom was an amazing woman. She did her nursing. She was a theatre sister during the war. She did her nursing in London during the Blitz. She probably spent more time down in the air raid shelters, in the underground, than she did above ground, sleeping during that period. And she's just such a strong woman, and having 3 sons. The poor gal, for the longest time, her holidays were all based around fishing and camping trips. So, because that's what us boys wanted to do the whole time. So, But she's a really great woman, and certainly I owe her an awful lot, as did my two brothers, for giving us such a wonderful upbringing.
I've got fantastic, very, very special memories of your mom. Nick, every time I sit down and watch golf, which is as often as I can, and I watch television, I think about the old days and what a special occasion it was to watch films that came to us sort of 3 months after the event. And I know that you guys at Warren used to get together to watch on the 16mm cine, the British Open, and those were special occasions, were they not? Black and white, but we were all riveted.
It was amazing. Friday and Saturday night, all the cigarette companies, whether it was Rothmans or whoever it was, BAT, would have these promotional films, and I remember seeing the first one that I saw, I remember so clearly, was the Piccadilly World Match Play in must have been 1968, and Gary Player was playing Jack Nicklaus, and I mean I just was amazed, at how beautiful and green this golf course was. It was at Wentworth, which is just outside London. And then the next one I saw was the British Open, the Tony Jacklin one at Lytham and St Anne's in 1969. And that made a huge impact on me. I remember, we went on a Friday night. They do 2 showings, one for the kids on early Friday night and then one for later. And then they do another one on Saturday, one of the 2 on Saturday. And it was just, I was absolutely in awe of these golfers on there: Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer and Gary Player and Tony Jacklin. Bob Charles played really well there as well. So that was the first real taste I had of international golf. I'd seen some of the pro tournaments around, Zim and or around the cities, and we had 2. We had one in Bulawayo and one in Salisbury or Harare. And so, that was the only time I ever saw the pros play, but nothing like what I saw at the Open Championship. So I guess that planted a seed for me, and one thing, and then obviously the next year, another one came out, 1970, when Jack won at St Andrews. And then they got them every year. And of course, then I was addicted to the game by then, I loved it. But I still, during that period, I loved to play cricket, and I loved rugby.
Yes.
I played all the sports still. It was only when I was probably around about, I think it was like under 16, and I was still a bit of a shrimp then. I wasn't as big as some of the other guys who were in the scrum with me, and we were playing at Churchill on a Saturday morning, and of course, the fields were rock hard, not a blade of grass on there. I found myself at the bottom of a loose scrum, with one arm around my neck and my right foot around the other part of my neck. Anyway, and I got my face, I had the usual, all the grass burns or dirt burns as they were there, and grazed, and I said, you know what, I think I'm going to try and play golf now instead of this. But under 16Bs were a tough team to get into, but they also had some really tough guys on it, But it was fun. It was fun though, and that was the time I think and then I decided to play field hockey, because I figured field hockey was probably a better game for ball skills than that for golf. And then my last couple of years at PE, I played hockey, which I really enjoyed. Davey Houghton was our goalie, and you talk about an athlete, that guy. I mean, we had some phenomenal athletes come out at that period, Ray Mort. I mean, obviously Ian Robertson. I looked up to those guys.
Yeah.
There were just so many great sportsmen, around there. And they set the bar very high. George Harvey, who was playing golf. Yes. Teddy Weber, who was playing really well then. These were all, they weren't contemporaries of mine, but these were guys that I played, with in competition. And I mean, we just had a really great batch of guys. The one guy I was sad never got to see play was Doug Black. He was around the time when you and I were probably in our sort of maybe 9, 10, 11. He was really promising. And there were just so many. Bob
Simon
White,
Jeffries. Simon Jeffries,
yes. Yeah. Spencer English, all those guys we played with. There were so many good ones.
Yeah, they were.
So it was fun. And, they were always, it was funny because you always wanted to beat the older guys, in those days. That was the big thing for us, because you knew then you had to jump on, on the guys around you if you could beat the guys that were older with you than you. So I try to learn everything I could from them. George Harvey obviously was a great inspiration to us, because there was a time, probably in sort of like the early mid 70s, where he was one of the best amateur golfers in the world. Gerald Micklem actually said that he had watched George in the South African Amateur. I think it was in like 74, 73, and he said, this guy is, he's very special. So, and he definitely was on the golf course. He could, as we say, flat out play.
Nick, because I'll probably not get a chance to talk to Dennis in person, a little bit about Dennis. I like to talk about him as he's an Umtali boy, born and bred. And he was the last amateur to win the South African Open, 1959. He won the South African Open and could have been a much better golfer, but something went wrong with his swing. But just a little bit about Dennis.
Yeah, Hutchie, I didn't really know very well, because he'd already gone down to South Africa when I started playing well, and then as soon as I got down to South Africa, I met him, with Dale Hayes and a few of the other guys. And that was the first time. And he wasn't actively playing then, because I think he had such a bad back at that stage that he wasn't playing full time, but he did come and play in some of the events. And so, we got to chat. And of course, I told him I knew you and the connection with your dad and mom, and of course, Umtali. So, but there was always sort of like a kinship, I guess, between all of the Rhodesians or Zimbabweans on tour, and but yeah, Hutchie was, I never got to see him play his best, but I heard when he was at his best, he was very good. But one guy that I did get to spend a lot of time with, was Hobday, who I idolized the man, and I just loved his demeanor and his outlook on life, and the way that his sense of humor. He was just one of the all-time greats for me. And in fact, you and I, the last time I saw him, you and I had lunch with him. It wasn't long after you and I had lunch, which in Durban, they all longer. They passed away.
Nick, I look back on that. I think we might have played one of the last rounds that Simon ever played. That day we played with him.
Yeah.
It wasn't long after that he was in trouble, old Hobday.
Yeah.
Nick,
good man. One of the funniest people I ever met in my life. He just had this incredible, grabbing the moment and making humor out of it. Didn't matter what it was, and he helped me an awful lot during my career. And I always used to say, when I traveled with him in 1980 in Europe, that was a real experience, and when I got back home, all my buddies said to me, did you really travel with Hobday? Because in those days we shared rooms. We didn't have enough money to have our own room. So we shared rooms, and that was a big thing. You had to find a good roommate, And so McNulty and I, we roomed together for a while, and then Hobday and I roomed together in 1980. And when I got back home, I was having a couple of beers with some friends of mine, and they said, "Geez, did you really, room with Hobday?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what we had a great time." And it's a misconception how much he drank, because he really didn't drink very much. But he used to sit at the bar and he'd nurse a beer or two, three, and look like he was sitting there for hours drinking a lot. But he really didn't drink as much during tournaments, that is, that people thought. But man, a guy was like an unmade bed every day. He got up and he used to wash his clothes in the shower, and it was a nightmare being with him at times. And then one of my buddies said, "Well, what did you learn, being with Hobday?" I said, "Well, I learned a really valuable lesson. If I ever want to be successful as a professional golfer, I got to do everything totally opposite to him." and that was my motto to him. I said, "What do you do?" And I'd go do something opposite, with him. But
Nick, we wrote up some of those great stories in the book, but he wasn't big on attire. He didn't take a lot of time out trying to look smart. And he used to get into the shower with his kit on to wash it.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it would depend on how poorly he played, But if the funniest thing, you put on these colors together, there'd be I think greens and oranges, and then he'd put the brown and black on. I mean, he'd mix up the worst sort of color. And I said, "What are you doing with wearing that?" He said, "Well, first out the suitcase wins." That was his motto. And then when he was with Munsingware, which was, I don't know, not many people would remember that, but they were the ones that had the penguin on the breast. And he had a contract with Munsingware, and then at the British Open every year, he'd go over to the Munsingware caravan where they'd give you kit for the week, and he would get all the colors that no one else would wear. So we'd have these lime greens, we'd have these canary yellows, and these pinks and oranges, and all these different colors. And we said, why do you do it? He said, well, they won't give me any. All the nice ones they've set aside for the other players. So it was kind of funny, but he certainly was a character.
And Nick, they say one of the great strikers of the ball.
Well, I remember, go back, there's one, I was at Royal Salisbury, Royal Harare, and he was on the practice team. And I said to him, Mr. Hobday, can I come watch you practice? And he sat down, he was hitting balls at the time. And he said, sit down over there, right, 15 yards behind me. He says, and don't say anything. So I said, no problem. So anyway, I'm watching him hit balls, and this caddy who's shagging, picking up golf balls for him, he's just going with a 5-iron. He's taking one step, and he's just smoking the ball, hitting it so beautifully. And so eventually, after about, 20, 30 minutes, he said, if you want to ask me any questions? So I said, yeah. I said, how do I become a better player? And with the smoke dangling out of his mouth, I can still see it. He pointed to the middle of the 6-iron or whatever he was hitting. And he said, if you hit it out here more than the guy you're playing against, eventually you're going to beat him. And, that was a Hobdayism for me, one of those things that sort of you remember so vividly. But he was 100% right. Ball striking is guys who are good ball strikers, if they can putt and chip, which McNulty will vouch for, they will become really good players, and they'll have longevity too.
Nick, another great striker, a natural golfer, another one of your contemporaries, Dennis Watson. He just had amazing raw talent, did he not? And he could just hit a golf ball a long way.
Well, at 17, 18, 19, Dennis was so far ahead of all of us, to be honest. He was so good. He hit the ball a long way. He had a great touch around the greens. You're just an incredible player. He played number one for the Rhodesia junior golf team, I think, 2 years. And we didn't want anyone else to play number one. In fact, he beat Johan Killian, who was the top South African player, Springbok Junior, at Royal. He beat him, I think it was 6-5. And he had eagled number 13, which in those days was a par 5, to go 7 under for the day. Which, was 18 years old. This is proper golf. And we were playing off the back tees to hard pin positions. This wasn't set up for, a monthly medal or anything at the golf course. And we were astounded, the way he played and how. And he dusted this young guy, or this contemporary of his, a South African guy. But he just came over here. He was a groundbreaker here in the US because he came over the year before I did, and before Mark McNulty. And so, we were kind of watching what he was going to do here, because that was going to give us, some kind of idea. Because if he made it, then we had a chance. But he didn't like Europe. The European, the weather and the conditions of the golf courses weren't to his liking. And he came over here, and then I saw him in the end of 1981, and he'd come back, and he just started on the tour here. And I said, man, your golf swing looks great. What are you doing? He says, well, I've just been working with David Ledbetter. So David, I'd known when he was in England, and obviously growing up in Tim. But he said, David's over in the States now, and he's teaching full time. So I said, man, I play with Dennis, and I was watching him. Man, this guy's really changed his game. The dress position, everything. And I was going through a really bad time at that stage. So at the end of 81, I phoned up David. I got his number from Dennis. And I said, listen, I got to come see you because I don't know where I am. I'm lost. You know, I'm my third year in Europe and I'm going, or fourth year in Europe, I'm going backwards. So anyway, that was when I first went to see David, which was in the spring of, or I think it was March of 1982. But no, Dennis was really one of the great players. And, you know, we had a lot of great players. Fred Beaver, Martin Witcher. I mean, there were so many guys who were really, really super players, you know, and it was fun to watch them, you know, watch them all sort of play. And there were so many different swings and different ways we got it done. Nowadays, all the golf swings look pretty similar, but in those days, we had some real beauties out there.
Nick, let's go back to you. You've won the World Junior. You're now looking at taking golf very seriously. Just talk us through your progress up the ladder and into professional golf when you decided to turn pro, and a bit about the early years.
I still played junior golf. I came back from there, and you know, I'm still playing my junior golf, and my golf was good. I mean, it was pretty good, but you know, it didn't sort of change my whole. It didn't change, you know, rejuvenate my game. I was maturing, but you know, we were still, most of us were still getting beaten by a drum, like a drum, by George Harvey and Teddy Webber and the likes of those guys, because they were so much better than we were at that stage. You know, but I finished off school, and then I got an offer to go and play some amateur golf in England. And again, you know, I didn't have any money, but I sold my car and bought an air ticket and went over there and played in some of the amateur events, and actually got to the quarterfinal of the British Amateur that year, which was at Royal Liverpool. And then qualified for the British Open, which was one of the, you know, the best things that ever happened to me at the age of 18. And Hobday he also qualified. We qualified at St Andrews, and we went over on the Tuesday, because the qualifying in those days was on the Sunday, Monday, and the tournament, the championship started on the Thursday. So you only had Tuesday and Wednesday to practice. And we went over to Carnoustie and had a practice round, and we were watching on the practice tee. I was hitting balls on the practice tee, and next thing, here comes Lee Trevino and puts the bag down, because we were all still using caddies and, as we call it over here, shagging balls, picking up balls. And next thing, DiVincenzo comes next to me, and now they start speaking Spanish to each other, and I'm absolutely shitting myself. I just picked up my clubs and called my caddy, and then went to the back of the, you know, range and watched these guys hit balls. And I mean, I was in absolute awe. You know, DiVincenzo won the Open in 68 or 67,
yes,
and then 70 and 71. And obviously, I had watched those, or 71 and 72, I beg your pardon. I'd watched those victories of Trevino's on those 16 millimeter promotional films at a golf club. And no, it was just an awe-inspiring week for me, and to see all these greats, Jack Nicklaus, and obviously I'd seen Gary play. He'd been up to our country a couple of times, but you know, to see Arnold Palmer and to watch these guys hit balls, excuse me, was just something that I was in awe of. And you know, the power and just everything involved in the way that they played the game. You know, they dressed so beautifully. I mean, these were guys that were at the pinnacle of their careers, and you know, at the pinnacle of their sport. So it was something that, you know, sort of made a huge impression on me. But anyway, I got back home, and then, you know, I had to do my national service, which, you know, I really wanted to do, because, you know, I'd lived in that country for as long as I had, and I certainly wasn't going to turn my back on it. So I went into started my national service in March of 1976, and then got out at the October 77, and turned pro, you know, which is something that I really wanted to do. Although at one stage, you know, during my military, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, because my game was not very good. You know, obviously I wasn't playing as much, but you know, and then I sat down with my mum about, you know, two or 3 months before I finished, and she just said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, why don't you go and try professional golf? Because you're young enough. If you try it for 3 or 4 years and it doesn't work out, you'll be young enough to go and find another profession, or maybe go to university." So that's what I did, and of course I just got every year I just got a little better and a little better, and that was thanks to guys like Simon Hobday and obviously David Ledbetter, who helped me an awful lot during my career.
Nick, let's just jump in there. I know everybody would like to know more about your national service years. So tell us, in a little bit of detail about your time. To your great credit, I might add, you probably didn't have to go. You could have found a way around it, but to your great credit, you felt you must do your duty, and
and all my mates would do. All my mates were going, and then obviously my two brothers had gone, and my mom and dad had served in the military, and so to me, it was just a normal thing to do. I wasn't, I want to do it, but I got called up for the Air Force, which was great. After I remember us going through basic training, and we were all counting the days, and then all of a sudden, about halfway through basics, they slapped on another 6 months onto our national service, and there were I think there were 94 of us in my intake, and there were a lot of sulking men for a week or two after that, but we got over it, and then I passed out. We finished out, and I was sent to the ComCent to do communications, and my boss Sam Sines at the time, who was one of the best men I ever met, he said, "I'm putting you at Air Headquarters," and he says, "because I want you to play golf," because he was a huge sportsman. He was a great squash player, and is a great squash player. But he says to me, "You're going to go in there and you play golf. You got to be up there at 7:30 or 7:15 every morning, and you work until 5." He says, "You'll like it." Well, after about 2 weeks there, I'd had enough. I'd never been in an office, in my life before, and all of these offices and all of I just didn't want to be there. So I phoned him up. I said, "You got to get me out of here. I can't hack this." And so he then put me into the rotation of doing all of the signals at the different FAFs, which was really, that was an eye opener, because I got to see, the war firsthand, not as close as some of my friends got to see it, but you saw a lot of the effects of what it was doing, to people in that. A lot of the guys that I was with, a lot of the pilots, and guys were getting killed. That was, it was a tough time for that. But you do a lot of growing up. You certainly appreciate things a lot more when you see what goes on, and I think we all did. But one of the great things about when I look back at our upbringing in our country was that it was such a wonderful period outside of the war. But that war also taught us, which we obviously learned a lot at school. And, you go from junior school and you get to senior school, and you're a big deal when you're the head guy or a big guy at junior school. And then you go to senior school, and, now you're at the bottom of the totem pole. Then you go through, you get to senior school, then you're a big deal. And then all of a sudden you go to the military and you're back at the bottom of the totem pole. So there was all those sort of things that happened to us, which I think always taught us respect. And, certainly, the military was something that was in my blood because of my family. My dad retired as a major, but both my brothers had done their service. But, how can I say? It was a really learning period in the time. Would I want to go through it again? No, I don't think I'd ever want to do that again. But I made some really great friends, and it was a tough time, I think, for all of us.
A bit about some of the close friends you lost, Nick. I know that there were some chaps close to you.
The first guy, I was thinking about it the other day. Actually, I was watching something about the Air Force, and Rich Airy, who was he tried to get into pilots. He tried to be a pilot, and but something was wrong with him. But I played junior golf with Rich. And he was a little older than I was, probably about 4 or 5 years, maybe between Tim and I. And he went in the Air Force, and then he was a navigator in Canberra, and something went wrong. I don't know. I don't think it was shot down. I never really read the accident report, but he was killed. That was the first guy I was sort of understood. And then Nigel Willis, who was in my class at school, he joined SAS, and he was killed in '74, which was a real eye opener for us. That was when the war was home. Would hit home because. And then I was doing an external, and one of my close mates, one of my guys I'd gone through junior school and senior school, Graham Fanner, was killed, and I actually called in the Casevac over the radio for him to get pulled out, and he landed about 200 meters from where my communication center was, and we had to send him off to Rishinga Hospital. And I had no idea who it was. And I said to one of the techs, I said, "Do you get the guy's name?" And they said, "Yeah, the guy Graham Fanner." And he died on the way to Rishinga. So that was a terrible time. And in fact, Dennis Watson, he was with me. He was in artillery, and he was with me at that time. But down the road, but I'd seen him in the convoy that we were taking up there. But yeah, that was tough. And then toward the end, 77, 78, 79, we started losing a lot of guys. And, some of them were friends of mine, some of them were acquaintances, but it wasn't, that was a really tough time for everyone, I think.
Well, Nick, I think it's safe to say that you were part of one of the greatest small air forces in history. When you look at what you guys put together, how efficient it was and how effective, really quite something.
I'll tell you, the bravery and the courage of these guys, the pilots, the techs, always the army guys would say, "Oh, you blue job, you go sleep and you go back and you sleep under a tent and all that." And I always used to say, "Hey, who's the first to come in and help you guys out?" And we were always stuck straight in the action, the whole time. So, but I was proud to be a blue job, man. We had some great spirit, and the camaraderie and the humor that was out in, at these FAFs was just incredible. So, like I say, I had small pranks and stuff pulled on me when I was my early days out there. It was unbelievable. Mick Delport and Grant Dominic carried me out at Fort Vic. They carried me out. I was in the next door tent, and they carried me out in my stretcher and put me in the middle of the runway at Fort Vic on the runway there. And I woke up at I remember it was about 5:45 in the morning. The sun was beating down on me, and I couldn't figure out what had happened. And then I saw that I was in the middle of the runway, and I put two and two together very quickly, because having had two older brothers, who pulled tricks on us all the time, I realized that someone had carried me out there, and I knew who it was. It was Delport and Domini, who were on 4 Squadron at that stage.
Delport and Baldwin were not known for following the rules.
Yeah, there were a lot of guys who didn't, but Dick Paxton was one of the pilots who I really got on well with, and he passed away a while back. But he and I, whenever we were at a FAF together, we would run every morning or every evening. And Ted Lunt was another guy. He married Margie, who was in the comsen with me. But just great memories, great people, and I met so many wonderful characters. And I just. It was a real experience for me, and I'd go through the whole thing again, but I wouldn't want anyone killed. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'd go through the whole experience again to enjoy all that camaraderie with the people, which of course is impossible if there isn't a war going on. But made great friends then, and I still speak to Cocky Benneker a lot. I see Mike Kruger, Nigel Lamb. You and I speak. I mean, look at what he's done. What an incredible talent and athlete he has been. I mean, one of the best pilots that the country's ever produced, I think. But I was so lucky because I got to meet all these guys.
Nick, a word about Hugh Slatter looking after your station so that you could go and practice at Hillside.
he was one of the greatest men I ever met, to be honest, and was so kind to me during my time. I was at the Jock at Mutari, and there was just the two of us, and during the afternoon, sometimes the signals were coming in, sometimes they were slow, but he'd say, "Why don't you go off to the golf course?" And I didn't even have my golf clubs. And I told him, I said, "Well, I don't have my golf clubs." So he said, "Well, get them sent over here on clan transport." So I got my buddy, or I think my brother, someone put them on clan transport for me, and they came like the next day. And he said, "Off to Hillside, and they'll go up to Umtali Golf Club and go and play." So that's how I played quite a bit when I was there, probably once or twice a week at least. And he would man, the teleprinters while I was gone, which were very involved, by the way, because we had all this different tape that was coded, and he wanted to learn. So I taught him, how to get to starting points and all that sort of stuff, and how to read tape. And anyway, he was he was great to me. And then we went and played with one of the brigadiers. I can't remember. And now here I am. I mean, I'm an air craftsman. I'm the lowest rank that you can possibly find. And I've got to play with a brigadier, and now I'm terrified. If we beat him, what are the repercussions going to be on me? But anyway, Hugh was great. He was really, really good. And needless to say, we did beat them, but they were kind in defeat.
Wonderful stories, Nick.
Yeah.
I remember those days. Man, Nick's out the service, and Mom says, "Give it a crack." So you scraped a few pennies together and headed off to Europe.
Yeah, sold my car. Actually, I went down to South Africa first, because in those days they didn't have like a qualifying to get on the tour in South Africa. You would apply to the South African PGA, and if they accepted you, to get in, then you got in. And they didn't have any Monday qualifying or anything like that. It was straight into tournament. So my first tournament I played down, I turned pro sort of end of October or sort of middle of October, and went down south and drove down there, and actually I didn't have anywhere to stay, and I stayed in a friend of mine's garage for like 2 months, and it was perfect. I mean, and anyway, he was renting the house with a whole lot of other guys, but they didn't have any room in the house, but it didn't matter. But anyway, my first tournament was the South African PGA at Wanderers, and I think I finished 25th or somewhere around there. I made $277 or rand, which is equivalent to, yeah. Now I was making $103 a month in the Air Force, so now I doubled 2.5 times what I'd made in 1 week. And I thought, I could get used to this, because I've been living on $100 for 18 months. And then, I just got better and better. I think I made 2,500 rand that first year, or that first season. And we had to give 50% of our winnings back to the PGA. That was sort of to discourage guys turning pro and trying for a short period of time, and not doing it and then saying, "I'm not going to be a pro anymore," and withdrawing the application. But that was like a penalty to pay. You're paying your dues. So I ended up making, I think it was $1,200, which was still a fortune, and I saved up enough at that stage to go to Europe, where I was now exempt, to get onto the tour, but I still had to Monday qualify. So I came back home in between tours. I think it was the tour in South Africa finished in sort of like end of February, beginning of March, and then went over to Portugal for my first event, which was in end of March, beginning of April. Actually, I beg your pardon, it was the end of April in 1978, which was when I started my European campaign. So it was a lot of fun, that was an incredible time, because there was just so much going on in my life, which was fantastic. I was seeing this whole thing, playing the game, seeing the tours, and playing with guys who I was learning a lot from, not only by watching them, but also by asking them questions about how they saw the game and what they felt were the most important fundamentals. And then we were in Spain, at the Madrid Open it was probably about 2 weeks later. And it was the first time I got to see Sevi. Now, Sevi was 4 months younger than I am. He was, his birthday was April and my birthday is January. And he'd just come back from the Masters where he'd played really well. I don't think he won it that year. In fact, I can't remember what had happened. I'd have to look back. But I know he either finished second or third. He may have won it. No, I beg your pardon. Gary Player, did he not win it in 78? He shot 64 in the last round, and he was playing with Sevi. But Sevi was in, like, one of the last groups.
Yeah.
And most amazing thing, I watched this guy hitting balls at Puerto de Hierro, which is where we had the Madrid Open, on this polo field. And he's hitting these 5-irons, and his 5-iron's going as far as my 3-iron. But what's even worse, he's hitting the ball so high and beautifully. And then he gets out the driver, and I mean, all you heard was this, sound of the club head going through the air. I mean, this whoosh, and off the ball. And I looked at the guy who was caddying for me at the time, and I said, I'm light years behind this guy. This guy's 4 months younger than I am, and I'm light. I had no idea how good he was, and not only was he good, but a lot of his guys that he was playing against at that time were the top dogs. Dale Hayes had come back from America, played unbelievable, won the Order of Merit that year. And you had just all these great players there. I mean, it was amazing. But like I say, I just felt I was light years behind Sevi. And so, I guess that was a wake-up call for me. And that's when I really sort of said, shit, I got to get down and learn more about this game and figure out how to be more competitive, because I can't play like him. And I never could play like him. He was one of those few guys. There's probably been 4 or 5 that I've seen in my life, that have this incredible talent. They have more talent in their little fingers than most of us were given. And I'm not saying I wasn't given any talent, don't get me wrong, but when you watched these guys, they were like, Daly was one, Tiger Woods obviously was the other one. I never got to play a lot of competition competitively against Jack Nicklaus, just 1, 2 or 3 times, but I never saw him at his heyday, so it's hard for me to say. But of the guys I saw, Mickelson, incredible, just exuding talent. These guys could hit shots that I could never hit, long irons out of a divot that would come out like my 8-iron, come out the height, and this incredible talent. So it was fun at that stage to go and learn and to figure out how I'm going to get better. And, I kind of chipped away at it. And things certainly helped when I went to Ledbetter, because I'd never really had a lesson in my life. I mean, I'd had guys give me tips and things like that, but I'd never really had a guy who was going to analyze my swing, put it on video. Video was just coming out there. Before, what we had was 8mm films, and by the time you sent your 8mm film off for getting, what do we call it, cured and whatever, what do they call it, processed, the thing would come back, and you couldn't freeze the frame or anything. So this was like the beginning. And when I first saw my swing on video, when I went to see Ledbetter, I nearly threw up. I said, geez, you stopped that thing all over there, and there was all these different angles and all the different positions that I had. And anyway, we embarked on a swing building mission then.
Nick, in Europe though, you hit some hard times. It was touch and go whether you were going to be able to last it out. The money was low, and then there was a lucky break, wasn't there? There was.
Well, I had enough. It was like it was July of 78, and I had missed like 5, 6, 7 cuts. I got to play it was the end of June, and I'd missed so many cuts, and I was running low on cash. And I actually, in those days, it cost us about £240 a week to play. That was including your caddy, your hotel, your flight, or however you're going to get there. And I had like £260 on me. That's all I had. And I said, this is it. If I don't make a check this week, I'm out of here. I'm going back home and I'll regroup and come back next year. And we came to this golf course in Jersey called Lemoy, and I played really well the whole week. And don't ask me what it was, but it was beautiful sunshine. We had this golf course that was very similar to sort of like the courses that we grew up on, hard and fast, where the ball would run. And I played great. I ended up finishing, I think, 5th in the tournament, and I made £750, which really got me going. But more importantly, it got me into the next tournament, which was the Belgian Open. And I went over to Belgium, and I finished I think it was 8th there, and it was a bigger money tournament. I made £1,100. And then from there, went over to, I missed the cut, or missed the pre-qualifying at the one tournament, missed the cut the next week, and then missed the pre-qualifying, then went to the qualifying for the British Open and made that, and finished, missed the cut, but still made some money. And then the week after that was the Dutch Open, and I finished 2nd in the Dutch Open and made £3,750. And we were always looking at, hey, listen, if you've got £2,500 in your bank account, that means you've got 10 tournaments you can play in. That's how a lot of us thought about, the money we were making, because it just bought you more time. So of course, making £3,750, man, I'm good to go for at least another 15 tournaments or so. So that was a huge time for me.
Nick, that during that period, I know Simon Hobday ran into political trouble, and he couldn't collect his checks or something. He had to pick up cash, or just tell us a bit about that. It was under pressure from the British, I think.
Yeah, the British froze his bank account. The British froze his bank account. So any money that he made in Britain was frozen in his account, was paid automatically. But when he was on the continent, he could get the checks there, because most of those continental tournaments, with the German or the French or the Swiss Open, they didn't have sanctions against us at that stage, or they may have, but they didn't. What's his name? Have Simon on the sort of like a freeze and asset list. So that's what he did. So but all of us, if he needed help, we'd give him help. But I mean, he always managed to make a plan. And Simon, he was very good at doing that.
I think he had to go to the tournament organizers in Europe and ask them to pay him in cash, because he didn't have a bank account.
Some of them, yeah.
So he was walking around with sacks of cash. I know Kevin Woodward tells us.
I never really saw that, but he did carry a lot of cash with him, but not an excessive amount, not thousands and thousands. But I think if he made a big check, this was, because it all ended around 80 when I started really traveling with him seriously. We never really asked guys about their financial and money problems, whatever it was. But, all the guys would always make sure. So Simon, if he was short, we'd try and help him out. But he was never short. He never asked us. But, I think if he got a big check, he had another bank account somewhere that he'd put it into. But if he got a small check that he needed money to cash to go to the next event or whatever it was, he'd cash it. So there was the times where the guys would cash his check for him at some of the tournaments. I remember that.
Nick, who was dominant on the European tour those years? I'm just trying to think. I mean, the South Africans, Hubby,
John Bland. The Teeny Brits, John Furry was there. Vin Baker. There were a whole lot of guys who were sort of full timers on that tour, who were good players. There were a bunch of South Africans and at one stage and Zimbabweans playing on that tour, and we probably amounted to second only to the Aussies and the Kiwis in support of that tour. Because you must remember, in those days, the Swedes and the Danes and the French and there were Spaniards. There were a lot of Spaniards, but they were Europeans. But Americans, there was maybe one or two Americans that would come over and play. Some Asians would come and play, but not very many were there. So, that tour in those days was made up of the Europeans, the Australasians, and the South Africans and the Zimbabweans. It really was. Gave the tour that international flavor. But it's changed now. I mean, Europe was just taken off in the last 15, 20 years, certainly since, the mid 90s, I think, to the late 90s. They've really got some fantastic golf programs there for the youngsters, and they're just churning out. I mean, the Danes, what they've done, they've got all these guys, I mean, that are coming out that are just wonderful players, as well as the Swedes, golf's in a very healthy place right now. I mean, it is, apart from what's going on with LIV and what's going on with the PGA Tour and there's just a wealth of really good young players out there.
Yeah. Nick, Gary Player, when did you first actually see Gary playing? Did you watch him when he came up to Rhodesia to play those?
He came and played at Warren Hills. I guess it was about 1971, maybe, and he did an exhibition match. Well, he actually played 6 holes or 3 holes with 3 different people, and played a foursome for those. And one of my buddies, Jeff Cannings, played 3 holes with him. And so we were all watching him, and Gary, being Gary, he was on show. He was on top form. It was probably, I don't know how many people were watching, not that many, maybe 800, 600, 700 or whatever it was. And he was out there, just telling everyone about the game. And I mean, he's a great ambassador for the sport. He really is. And encouraging all the young guys, picking on the fat guys, because that's what he does. He doesn't like anybody that's overweight. So, and then trying to help them, encourage the youngsters in that. So that was the first time. I remember Jeff, my buddy, he bought this brand new glove to play these 3 holes with Gary Player, and it had rained in the morning or in the evening, and the golf ball, the hole was full of that lovely clay brown water. And Jeff held his putt out, put his hand in with his new glove on to pull the ball out the water. And Gary said to him, "What are you doing? You got your new glove on. Why you put your glove in the water?" He says, "Well, I wanted to shake a dry hand with you, Mr. Player." That's how quick he was. He's like 13 years old, and he still was quick to the fore. But he's just an inspiration to all of us, and watch him play. And I mean, the guy, he got more out of the game that he was given than anybody I ever saw, maybe except Corey Pavin. Corey Pavin was one of those guys who really had very little talent. I'm not saying Gary didn't have any talent, but when you compare him to Arnold and Jack and what their golf swings look like, and Gary didn't have a bad golf swing at all, but he scratched his way around a golf course many times to beat those guys.
Yeah. But Nick, there was that time he got a bit of a fright when Peter Matkovich, who was really just a young, I think he was still an amateur, beat him in over 18 holes, and Gary Player got a bit of a fright.
Gary didn't like to lose. He really didn't like to lose to anybody. He was one of those guys that I don't want to say he'd pull out all stops, but he certainly didn't like losing, and it showed. I mean, his intensity on the golf course was I don't think second to none. The guy was incredible, and he was a feared opponent. I mean, because when you got to play with Gary, there was always histrionics, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but he would make mountains out of molehills sometimes, and and that was just in his nature. It wasn't anything that he, I don't know. He's just an ultra competitor. That's what Gary was. Incredible competitor who, to him, winning was so important. And sometimes you sort of look at some guys and say, I mean, he used to look at me and say, you don't want to win badly enough. I said, well, my game's not strong enough. I don't putt and chip like you do, But, when I started playing well, and I said to him, I said, well, now I'm winning, because for that period of, 5 or 6 years, I played so well. But, you do have that. Everybody has that desire to win, some just more than others.
Nick, in fact, when we were doing the book, I think I told you, he very kindly had me to stay in Colesberg for a few nights. And hell, I think 3 of the most interesting days of my life. And when I hear people say, Gary Player talks too much about himself, I say to them, if you had done and seen what that guy's done, you'd also be allowed to talk about yourself, because I tell you, I was absolutely fascinated by him. The amount, his memory, a bit like you. But this guy has played golf with, I think, every president since Eisenhower. Up until then, I think Obama was president. I don't know if he played with Obama, but he played with everyone, and he could tell you stories about everyone. And he had met just about every person of importance in the last 30, 40 years. There was hardly an important figure in history who Gary Player didn't know. I don't know what's happening to his biography, but whoever gets to write it, I hope they do it right, because what an incredible story.
I tell you, one of the most amazing things, and having traveled now with, finished my career in that. So my career started in 77 and I retired in 14. So what's that, 37 years, or call it 40 years. I mean, Gary at his age now, which is, I think he's about 85 now, somewhere around there, maybe a little bit older. His traveling regimen is still incredible. But that during his time, the amount of tournaments he played in and the amount of times he sat in an aircraft seat, or the length of time, I don't think nobody has ever done that. I mean, honestly, not a sportsman anyway. He would go, he'd be playing at the Masters this week and then get on a plane on Sunday night and he'd go to Hong Kong and go and play there. And then he'd finish up at Hong Kong and go to Australia, and then back to South Africa. And he'd play, 4 tournaments on 4 different continents in 4 weeks, and how he slept, I have no idea. The guy, and probably win 2 of them. Excuse me. Amazing person, and like I say, he was driven. That was the one thing. Gary, or he was and he still is driven, because if you play with him now, he's so competitive still. He still wants to beat you like a drum. And but he's been a wonderful inspiration for all of us young guys from South Africa, and we learned an awful lot from him. And he paved the way. He really did. He paved the way for all the young guys from South Africa, the Ernies and the Gooses and Dale Hayeses and that, because it's kind of hard if you're coming over here to the States or somewhere and you're from a country that no one even knows there's golf on it, because they now, and Gary, and certainly Bobby Locke, but Gary particularly, he's a golfer from South Africa. And then when Ernie came over, they probably asked him questions, how much did Gary influence your career and whatever. And of course it was a lot. It really was.
And Nick, people forget, but he was winning tournaments at the height of the anti-apartheid movement. And it was tough for him. I mean, he was dealing with protesters on the golf course, death threats. He was under very serious pressure, and yet he still came out firing and could win tournaments.
He did. I mean, it happened enough. It didn't happen all the time, but it happened enough. But he was, again, so single-minded. I think when they realized that he would still win even under a death threat or under all of the anti-apartheid stuff going on, that they kind of gave up on it, because gave up on him because they weren't making any headway there. So that was a really interesting time, when politics was so involved in sport. there's things that are going on all around the world today, and no one seems to worry too much about involving sport in it. So it was kind of a sad time. There was so many great sportsmen who couldn't play, in other parts of the world, and it wasn't them. It was the governments that were doing all of the damage. So they were the ones that were creating the situations, not the sportsmen. So it was sad.
Nick, I know we're running out of time now, and I hope we can do another one because there's still so much more to talk about. But talking about politics, and I don't want you to get involved in politics, certainly on this talk, but you have played with Donald Trump, and how did you find him?
He's another character. He's a New Yorker. I mean, he's incredible man in many respects. Self-made. I mean, his dad had money, but I mean, he's taken the business to his whole business to new levels. He's one of those guys, you either love him or you hate him. And I've always him. I've known him for a long time. When I first came over here, I met him back in the early 80s. And it's always a pleasure to play golf with the president. I mean, it was great fun playing with him. We spoke about South Africa and Zimbabwe and about other parts, of the world. But he's like a New York salesman. He always tell you how good he is and what he's doing, whatever. I mean, that's Donald Trump. If you've known him for long enough, but this is going to be a very interesting election coming up for us in November here. So he's got a lot of support.
Nick, look, let's there's a hell of a lot more, and I hope we can do another one. Should we call it a day for now?
Sure. Just let me know, man. It might be just trying to think when I'm going to be. The hard to get an hour, it sounds like nothing, but try and get everything sorted out. Oh, I'll figure it out. I've got next week. I've got to go to Tampa, and then the week after that is I'm home for the week after that. Actually, for 2 weeks after that, and then I'll go to Augusta for the week. So,
well, I'd love to do another one, Nick. Because we haven't really got to the big stuff. So
I waffle on.
We'll just leave it for a week or two.
Okay.
And then we can give it another crack.
Sounds good, man. All right.
Thanks, Nick.